I'd like to share this post that I saw on X about an interview between Ray Dalio and Tucker Carlson. And this guy, Gary Stone, has done us the favor of summarizing this. And I want to go over it because it's a really nice highlight to some of the ideas that I've shared. And there's also some really good information in it. So let's go ahead and do this. And that will save you the time from having to watch the interview, although go for it if you'd like. Okay, so Gary breaks it down point by point. Here's the first point. America's new civil war. We're already in it, but not with guns yet. Dalio warns there are irreconcilable differences that each side is willing to fight for. The polarization is the worst since 1900, with the lowest cross-party cooperation in history. This is an issue I've spoken about a lot. In modern America, there are factions of people, and I think there are more than two, and they're overlapping Venn diagrams, by the way. There's an awful lot of circles on that picture. But there are factions in America that have extremely low amounts of cooperation with the others. What do I mean by cooperation? I don't just mean that they disagree. They don't interact as much. The sociologist Charles Murray wrote a book about this that was very well evidenced. That in modern history, Americans have less contact with each other across demographic lines than they ever have before. And it's been a significant and rapid shift. And the implications of this are extensive. One of them is it's very hard for certain demographic groups to, and of course I'm including ideological demographics, just to make that clear. It's increasingly difficult for them to even accurately imagine the worldview of the others. They have this caricature at best, but often they're completely ignorant of them as well. They don't. So, for example, coastal people act like Middle America doesn't exist. They just don't even pay any mind to it. They don't think anyone lives there. It's an amazing thing. And then if they were challenged to try to accurately explain what these people think, what they care about, what they do, they can't. They can't. The best you get is this caricature. Now, that's just one example. There are many, many, many more. Okay, point 2, the 60% crisis. A shocking statistic that explains everything. I think that's an exaggeration. 60% of Americans have below a 6th grade reading level. Only 3 million people out of over 330 million are driving all technological innovation. This education gap is creating an unprecedented wealth divide. Okay, let's talk about this one. First off, I think it's far fewer than 3 million people that are driving all technological innovation. Far fewer. But the point here is that a decreasing percentage of Americans are actually contributing to the system. An increasing quantity of them are just net takers. Now, you can look at this in any kind of isolated slice you'd like. You could look at it in terms of taxes, right? Not just whatever it means by being technical innovators. You could look at it in terms of trades. You know, what percentage of people are actually building things? Could look at it as a percentage of the population that's growing things, that's farming. More and more people are just living off of residual benefits of people who have been more virtuous than them. Whether they're alive, and that's talking about transfer of wealth and also just printing money. So money printing is a tax. And it hurts everyone who's actually earned money. It benefits everyone else. And because they can give it away. But it's just another tax. It's just another wealth redistribution tax. But there are past people who made these tremendous contributions to society, and everyone else is just riding their coattails, living off the fumes of that. And so it's an increasing problem. And then you mix in what's mentioned here, that 60% of Americans have below a 6th grade reading level. And then you mix in math. What's the analytical capability of Americans? So when you have an increasing number of morons who have the right to vote, what do you think is going to happen? They're going to support dumber and dumber programs and more harmful programs, especially when it comes to unintended consequences and long-term consequences, because they can't see the future. They have the worst take on what the future will be like, the least accurate. And if you have any doubt, look at their lives. These are not people who plan their personal lives according to long-term consequences that they can see, let alone the ones they can't, right? And they see less of them than more intelligent people could. And let's get back to that before we move off of this point. Why are so few people driving the technological innovation? Which, by the way, you might say, well, who cares? Who cares if we get another Facebook? All right, I'm right there with you with that. But that's not the point. Technological innovation isn't just an app, another app to waste time on. The critical technological innovation is the kind that yields greater production in society. So think of something like when the spreadsheet program was invented, right? The first one. If we can't continue to produce increases in productivity in society, we will be overcome by entropy. That's a hard and fast rule. But basically, complexity creates a race condition. Just like if you remember the Cold War, there was a military race between the USSR and the US. And the question was, which nation could outpace the other? Well, that's a race, and we have a race that's upon us at all times because of complexity. And if we can't keep generating more output and cheaper output over time, what happens is the overhead of the system will overcome our ability to produce, and society will collapse. And right now, what we have is that things are so complicated that you need a higher and higher IQ and more drive in combination to contribute. And those things are extremely limited in society, and there's nothing you can do to increase the number of people who fit the bill. And so more and more of the continuation of the system rests on fewer and fewer shoulders. And that is a guaranteed recipe for eventual collapse. There's no way to escape it. So, point 3, the AI time warp. Now, I've said a bunch about this. I've got videos coming out about it. He says we're going to go through a time warp in the next 5 years. Current AI systems already match PhD level knowledge across all fields. This capability compounds daily, revolutionizing economic policy, military strategy, social systems, and healthcare. I will push back on this one just a little. Without some absolutely revolutionary hardware advance or energy advance, this is not going to go as well as people like Ray Dalio think. There are several wealthy and influential people who I think have rose-tinted glasses about AI. Right now, for example, it costs about $20,000 a month to use present systems to replicate one PhD level researcher. And that's just an agent that can crunch through some pretty rudimentary stuff. AI is reductive. It's not creative. And these are contentious issues, I realize, but obviously they're not the focus of the video. So I'm just spouting off my piece on that, and we'll move on. 4, the China reality check. Dalio drops a bomb. The U.S. will never catch up to China in manufacturing in our lifetimes. China controls 33% of global manufacturing, more than U.S., Europe, and Japan combined. They're dominating in robotics, chip production, and AI application. So that's actually an incorrect fact. China does not manufacture more than US, Europe, and Japan combined. It's more than the US, Germany, and Japan combined. The other European countries push it over the line. Anyway, it's a little thing. I've said a lot about China, okay? So I'll just leave that one there. To me, that's the least of the concerning things about China. But it is, there's this oversimplification, which is a perennial problem with people, that somehow we can reshore manufacturing. People don't understand that the reason manufacturing went to China in the first place, it wasn't just because of bad treaties passed by politicians. And it wasn't even because the unions kept cranking the price of labor up in the US beyond what was reasonable, although that absolutely happened. The real shift was that China was creating more and more machines to do the work, and that was the driving force in reducing the cost and offshoring, not just the fact that the Chinese at the time had a very low labor cost, although that obviously contributed. And what people don't realize is you can't just create factories by flipping a switch. It takes an enormous amount of time and money. And no one who, well, let me phrase this carefully. Anyone who does that in the United States, with how divided we are politically and socially, is making an enormously risky bet on the future, because things change so quickly and so dramatically, depending on who the president is or which Congress people are elected in a given election cycle, that you're making investments that have a 20-year return, and you need things to go consistently for 20 years to make any money. And we're on a cycle that maybe that's going to change significantly every 2 years. And anyone who does that is taking on immense risk. And unless the profits are enormous, no one's going to do that. And so it's kind of a silly thought to think that even extreme measures like tariffs are going to significantly sway the current global manufacturing picture. There are just far too many variables there. 5, the innovation paradox. Dalio claims that the U.S.'s last advantage is innovation and universities. But he tempers that. He says half our top innovators are foreigners who came to our universities. And with AI reaching PhD level knowledge, even this edge is at risk. Now let me circle back to this AI reaching PhD level business. Almost all PhDs, so all PhDs have to do a big old project, the dissertation, in order to get their PhD. And it used to be that you actually had to do something significant. So it's still the case that you go before a board of seasoned PhDs, and it's called a test. They're supposed to test. It's not a question of knowledge alone. That's more of what you get at your bachelor's level degree. But it's your innovation that they're supposed to be measuring. You're supposed to significantly advance the state of the art in whatever your field is in order to get a PhD. That's what it means, okay? But they hand these things out like candy now. And they give them to people based more on the time they spend rather than what their innovation is and the quality of it. So I don't dispute the fact that AI agents they now have this quote unquote PhD level knowledge. But there's a difference between knowledge, which is knowing something, and wisdom, which is essentially the ability to create something. Although I'm making that fuzzy on purpose. There are deep distinctions here and intricacies. We're just skipping over this. But knowing something and being able to create something are two very different things. Now, most PhDs in the United States today, most people granted a PhD, never created anything. Not anything that's important to anyone. And so why is this relevant to the point here, this innovation paradox? Because very, very, very few people are actually innovators today. And the number's shrinking for the same reasons I alluded to before. As complexity increases, it becomes all the more difficult to actually create an innovation that actually matters for long enough to affect anyone, because conditions change under complexity very rapidly. But it takes a lot more genius, I don't know what other word to use, to climb that mountain and make a contribution. Okay, so he says half our top innovators are foreigners who came to our universities. This is true, and for the most part, it's a numbers game. If you have a country with 1 billion people, your top 1% are more numerous than the top 1% of a country with 300 and some million, right? But I strongly disagree that the U.S. has an advantage in universities other than brand name. The universities are a joke. They are corrupted, and there's no way back. So it is the case that the U.S. still has an advantage on innovation. Culturally, countries like China are very, very, very bad at innovating. When you have a communist system that controls thought with extensive interventions to do so, it's extraordinarily difficult to suspend that and suddenly be creative in the ways the government wants you to be. You see how that works? Now that's a cautionary tale for the US, because as we become more communistic ourselves, and we're very far down that road, of course innovation is going to fall off. And it's not just because we're training people to not think critically, while also incidentally claiming that we're doing the opposite. It's that the reward for innovating has to drop like a rock in a communistic system. That's the way it works. So of course innovation goes out the window. People aren't going to take the risk. It's not worth it. Point 6, the social control dilemma. AI will lead to one of two scenarios: complete totalitarian control or total anarchy. There's no middle ground. And the scariest part, no one is in control of this transition. Yeah, I agree that AI is a horse that's already been let out of the barn. Because we've got absolute fools in power, they don't understand any of this. So whatever happens, happens, I guess. I want to save time by not diving into that one too much. Point 7, the community solution. Power and wealth have zero correlation with happiness beyond basic needs. The highest determinant of happiness is community. Countries with strong communities consistently show higher happiness regardless of GDP. You know, I really like Ray Dalio. There are some points he has I strongly disagree with, but his book Principles is amazing. And it really, really helped me in my life. But he does have this tendency to try to put a positive spin on everything. And, that's unfair. He's really good at saying some things that need to be said that aren't very comfortable. And it seems like he tries to say at least one thing that's a positive, actionable takeaway from all the bad stuff. But unfortunately, it's often kind of fake or overstated. And this is a great example of this. I agree that once your basic needs are met, power and wealth have a declining correlation with happiness. It's not zero. Basic needs is actually something very, very minimal. And you can't tell me that a guy who lives in a shack and is pooping in a hole in the ground wouldn't appreciate having a flushing toilet and a climate-controlled house. Now, there is a declining correlation once you get past a nice standard of living. However, I think the biggest blind spot on this is that if you don't have power and wealth, someone else will. And if they are a moron, they are absolutely going to ruin your life. And so there's this popular meme going around that says, don't be mad at billionaires because they don't have any influence over your life. Yes, they do. Yes, they do. Who controls how much property tax I pay? Not billionaires, but bureaucrats that are local. Increasingly, the state is run by billionaire types. They have a lot to say about the laws that are used to control me and the taxes that I pay. And then at the federal level, the frequency of wealthy people and powerful people, it increases. Now, it's not about money alone. And there's no rule that says if you're a billionaire, you're a bad person. The point is that at some point, the importance of power and wealth goes away from creating happiness and goes towards preserving it from being taken away from you by someone who has more than you do. Now, I'm a huge proponent of the fact that your long-term joy primarily comes from the decisions that you make. It's something that you're in charge of. But it's ridiculous to say that you can live in some bubble and no matter what happens, you can preserve it. No matter what people on the outside do or don't do, right? If your house burns down because some idiot burns down your house, your life has fundamentally changed, right? So anyway, maybe that's an argument in favor of his point, which is that communities are very important. I agree. And I do think, and I've spoken about this, that our local communities are increasingly important, particularly the counties that we live in. Now, this might seem like a crazy thing to anyone who lives in any place that most people live in, because maybe you've got millions of people in the county that you live in. Well, there are many counties across the United States that have less than 10,000 people. And you might not feel like there's anything you can do about your county if you have millions of people in it. But if you live in a county with less than 10,000 people, you do have a path to have an impact. Okay, so that's kind of it. I hope that this has been useful to you and that it's an example of a collection of ideas that I have talked about that may have seemed random, but here they're put into context by a person who has achieved an immense amount of success in life and who has a lot of money. So maybe that gives credence to them a little further than what you found in them before.